I asked Peter Milligan in one word to share with my students what they need to know about writing scripts. And he said, you have to remember that a script, even when it's approved, it's liquid, because comics are a collaboration. And if you're not ready to pass your part of the job along, maybe you should think about just writing a book.
Hey, thanks for listening. On the heels of publishing the last episode, I thought it'd be a good idea to get a head start on this episode's intro before losing all sense of time at Heroes Con. Turns out, not only was time inconsequential, the intro I wrote was as well. I fell into a deep well of emotion when I entered the convention center, and I needed to explore and confront this fear there and here. I thought maybe listeners would be upset that I only published 2 episodes over the better part of a year. Would the last guest I recorded with be pissed that their episode wasn't out yet? Had the flowing river of life washed away any and all interest in the podcast? For me and the listeners, I just didn't know. But I won't bear the lead here. No. Everybody cared about how I was, not the show. So it was 2 days of their friendship and compassion that cinched my desire to return to the mic. One of the first things I did was find this week's guest and promised their episode would publish in 4 days. Then I found some of the guests I left in scheduling limbo and assured them that they would hear from me. Internal guilt overrode those fears, but then I was left with a list of 160 creators to ask onto the show. And for you math wizards out there, that's 3 years of weekly episodes. But seeing as I no longer publish weekly, that would be 5 years. Thankfully, not everybody makes it on the show. Some aren't a right fit for me, nor me for them, and that's totally fine. I think the general excitement of being at the convention, talking with old friends and past guests who've become new friends, masked an underlying fear that I really hadn't diagnosed. But on Friday, when the clock said that there were less than 2 hours left, and I hadn't asked anybody new onto the show, I recognized the fear of asking strangers if they would take an hour and a half out of their schedule and talk with me. Cold calling fear isn't a part of my makeup. I like talking to strangers, but something held me back. I noticed the hour and lack of new guests while talking Formula One with my buddy Dexter Vines. So I went to the next table and asked another buddy, Carl Story, for an overdue interview. While I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with Carl, that's not exactly the cold call I needed to start with. And then the fantastic Amy Chu came over. So I talked to her and I asked her. Now, let me set the record straight. This isn't the story of how I raced from table to table for the rest of the weekend, gathering emails of the best and brightest creators. No, this is far, far from it. Year after year, I leave Heroes Con with close to 50 emails of people who I want to talk with. This weekend, I left with less than a dozen new emails and maybe just as many verbal confirmations of people who I'm already in contact with. I kind of chalk a fair amount of it up to being a bit disorganized. While I had a really great list set up, I hadn't located anybody on the seating map. Hell, I even lost someone. I found them, saw their table, and I could never find them for the rest of the weekend. I made the effort whenever the opportunity presented itself. Oh, here's someone I want to talk to. I kept reminding myself, if you're underperforming, don't go at it yourself on this one. So I let my heart lead the way. If I felt like talking to a friend, I did that. If it wanted me to introduce myself to a new person for the podcast, I did that too. I mean, I ended up missing a lot of important people that I wanted to speak with and I would love to have on the show. And I hope I could be persuasive enough via email. I feel if I had built the right system, knowing their locations and being able to find them without having to spend time just kind of randomly walking about, I think that would have bypassed the fear. And maybe that would have been better. But then again, I don't know if I needed to go through what I went through. Serendipitously, I had a great sort of check-in with past guest and buddy Todd DeZago. And he's been in the podcast game of recent. And we kind of ended up just comparing notes about having a show and what we want out of it as the people kind of running it and how we structure it. And I left my time with him like feeling more happy for him, for myself, and kind of armed with a new way to look at the Tradecraft podcast. So there's more to come on that. So let's get to it. This week's guest is the quintessential confluence of cool comics and cool rock, Shelly Bond. Last year, this OG Vertigo editor published what I believe to be a must-have book for the craft of making comics, Filth and Grammar, the comic book editor's secret handbook. It's from Off Register Press. I have the link in the description. If you are involved in the comic making process at any level, this is the book. And let me just say, after last episode, I really hope to leave any mention of Hurricane Helene behind, but we recorded this episode on September 26th in the middle of the rainstorm, and the floods hit Asheville on the 27th. So the episode begins with a mention of the hurricane that's on the way, and I had no idea what was to come. So after nearly 9 months, this is me with Shelly Bond.
The other thing you have to know is that we live near an airport, so you might hear planes in the background.
Well, I'm on the edge of a hurricane right now.
Oh God,
So.
where are you? You're in Florida?
No, please. How dare you?
Oh geez, I'm so sorry. Where are you? Where are you? I know that isn't there a hurricane expected in Florida?
Yeah, but I guess it's heading inland. So I'm up in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the mountains, but
oh, okay.
We're sitting on 24 hours of constant rain right now. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, honestly, we could use more rain. There's too much sun out here for my liking. It's been so hot.
The two of you, what are you guys doing in that area?
Well, DC Comics. They paid
Right.
to move us, and it was worth it at the time,
Yeah. That's okay. That makes complete sense. I remember talking with Marie when that whole thing was going down, and
Marie Javins.
Because she was sort of like because she wasn't working full time for them.
Right. She was the swing shift.
Yes.
She came over for a finite amount of time and ended up bagging the editor-in-chief job, right?
Totally. She pulled the Michael Corleone, right?
I'm so happy to know that she is the first female editor-in-chief. I think that rocks.
It is I think it's such a great thing for the industry. It's so seemingly still kind of underappreciated in so many ways because she's Marie.
She's chill. She doesn't need to grandstand.
No, not in the least. But so before we get chit chatty, we'll do a little coffee talk, or tea talk as it is for this time. So in my hands is what I consider a holy relic of some sort. 2 years ago, I was up in my friend's house up in Pennsylvania. He lives in Manhattan, and we were chilling out in the middle of a snowstorm, and he gets a phone call. hangs up. He says, "Hey, do you want to go to David Bowie's apartment tomorrow?" And I say, "Yes, please." The Bowie family sold the apartment to somebody. So that the apartment that he and Iman lived in, I guess since like the early 80s, they sold it, and the new family wanted to renovate, which is what people do. But you're like, you walk through this place, and Shelly, everything is hand built, like everything, solid wood, gorgeous. I have tons of pictures of that I took around because it was so important. But I was in the kitchen, and they had pulled everything out of the drawers, and sitting on the counter were a bunch of these. And I'm like, I know what these are. They are extra backsplash tiles.
Yeah.
For David's kitchen, and there are these metallic chrome backsplash tiles to go along with all the stainless steel elements in the space. And so I said, that is going with me because I can't, he's gone.
Because
so
Bowie.
I've got this.
Because Bowie, you don't even need to say any more than that. Yeah. The reason I am here, who I am, doing what I do, is his fault.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting to me how much impact he played in my life that I didn't know he was playing in my life for a long time. I have older siblings, and they sort of put this music in my head at a very young age, but I didn't realize what I was more focused on Kiss. Meanwhile, there's the other guy with makeup on the record albums, playing his songs. And I was like, oh, I like that too, because it's cool. And the guy's got a cool makeup on his face. That was an easy 1-for-1 for me. But yeah, it's just that fearlessness and creativity that I think he manifested, which I think all of us can gain from by just saying, yeah, I'll do it.
And he also, as much as he was a provocateur, he understood how to capture the universal language of longing and desire in performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and never leaving your audience or never allowing your audience to grow tired of whatever you do.
Yes, and I feel like because he was able to just like at least project some sort of normalcy when he was interviewed, or if he would release his list of like favorite books or his favorite band, you never felt bad if you didn't like a certain Bowie era or Bowie album.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there are some things he didn't like also about other performers. And like I always just felt like as much as he was a superstar, he almost wasn't. He had that one chance. Like he had like more than 3 chances. And he blew the first couple. So like I think he realized that like he was rolling the dice and he was lucky. And I guess I feel like he probably never ever forgot that. And that's so much respect from where I'm sitting.
It's hard to remember the sort of these chances we get in life sometimes because we get caught up in the day-to-day or the highs and the lows, whatever follows. It's real tough to go, okay, wait a minute. What was the moment? What was the thing? How do I make sure that I'm staying on point? And this could be with anything in life, like, hey, I need to lose 40 pounds or whatever the thing is. And it's very tough to stay on top of that in life.
And also to stay humble.
Sure.
Because once you get money, fame, accolades, you kind of forget that it could leave as quickly as it came to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the best lessons we can teach our kids and the next generation of comics makers and art makers is just don't forget where you came from.
Yeah.
If someone held a door for you, you better reciprocate and thank that person as often as possible and do it for others, even when people don't appreciate what you've done, because it's good for the soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess it unburdens things in life. That's tough.
It does. But I don't know if we're recording right now, but one of the
Sure.
things I wanted to mention was that, like, I've taken to challenge myself. I've always dared myself to do things, starting with the high dive at a swimming pool. Um, Cause you kind of gotta, or you're just going to be stuck in a room in a small town eating chalk. Life is too short to not go for it. But I have to say that when I see people on social media behaving badly, and they do all the time, I try, if it really irritates me enough that I want to write it down,
Mm-hmm.
I'll also do something really nice. Whether it's offer a free digital copy of my book, whether it's throw in an extra sticker or two if somebody ordered something from me, or whether it's just baking a carrot cake and giving half to a friend who liked my carrot cake 5 years ago. I feel like I learned everything I needed to know about life from how my dad raised me in his image as a businessman. He used to say, be nice, it doesn't cost you anything, and follow the money. Just
Mm.
great advice. It's like, do unto others, don't be a jerk, and keep your eye on the prize. Stay focused on your own goals and your own dreams, and don't let the negativity and the naysayers drag you down to their level. They're not worthy of the space in your brain. And that's just
Mm.
sort of like what I try to espouse and reflect in my own personal work, because I'm not getting any younger. I did celebrate a birthday yesterday, and it wasn't a milestone birthday, but they all are
Yeah.
after you turn 35.
Yeah.
They just are, you know?
Yeah. I thoroughly agree. I don't see a way of functioning if you're not being really nice to people. Like I can't go through a day. Like I may be quiet or aloof at times, but that's not me towards anybody else. It's just me being me. But I'm always happy to be around people and help anyone I can. And I like how you say about pushing it, moving it forward, paying it forward. And I think that's an easy transition right now to talk about your book, Filth and Grammar. Because when I saw you post it, I was like, oh, that's like the perfect book. I can see the perfect books that are needed for whatever, industry there is. I'm like, oh, this is a perfect book because I think it's a topic that is so under discussed in the comic industry. And when I ordered it, and like you said, being really nice, you wrote in the book, and you wrote in a note card in the book, and I don't think you were like, oh, you don't know me. I mean, like, although I'm surprised we don't, since you were in the DC offices when I was working for them, but I didn't venture into the rarefied air of Vertigo.
Your name looked familiar to me, and so many people came and went in those years, and I
Mm-hmm.
always was just 200% focused on my day job, which was a day for night job. So I didn't have many friends
Mm-hmm.
other than a few colleagues. Didn't know my neighbors in my nondescript 8th Avenue, 53rd Street apartment, and really spent my time making comics and making connections and treating people how I wanted to be treated.
Mm.
That's the secret to my success, if it's success. I mean, I tell my editing students that it's just as hard to break in as it is to stay relevant, because you cannot believe that the good times will continue all the time. Like, audiences change, corporations change, people get hoodwinked at the top, people get laid off for reasons that are ethical and reasons that are unethical. You kind of can't wallow in it.
Yeah.
And you kind of got to always like consider your next move just an adventure.
And DC kind of like, I don't want to say struggled, but they reckoned with a lot more corporate, entanglement than Marvel did for a much longer period of time. You could just see how like, oh, well, now we're owned by Warner Brothers, and how does this affect things? And it really did affect things. And, you move from one building to another in New York, and then to a third building, all within a 6-block radius. It was that's a lot of change for an industry that doesn't chase after change. Innovation isn't a thing that comic books goes after. It goes after the tradition, and how do we maintain that reader interest? So how did you like, I mean, you moved from New York to LA. So, I mean, the idea of managing that, like, was a focus always on like the opportunity that would come of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm working on the third part of my graphic memoir editing trilogy, which, yes, it's a mouthful, but it's a trilogy because when Grant Morrison wrote The Invisibles, it was a trilogy. And I found that if I follow in Grant's footsteps, magical things happen. I not only got to be the editor of, I think, one of the most monumental works of comics fiction, this side and that side of the 21st century, but I also like landed a husband through it, which may or may not have been his fault. So happiness and involvement with Grant Morrison go hand in hand with me. So basically the third part's hard to write about because it's this last big chunk of my life. And the truth of the matter is I saw Jeanette Kahn leave DC Comics. I'm not even sure what the story was, but it was devastating when she left because she was such a badass role model as a strong woman in publishing. I was reading Dynamite when she was the editor of Dynamite magazine. You might remember it. We seem to be in a similar age range, but back in the 70s. So the fact that she was brought into DC Comics and she actually had to play in the locker room. I mean, I say I had to survive the locker room with a clothespin on my nose, but I can't even imagine how she walked in there. But she was smart. She was tall. She was fierce, and she had a good head on her shoulders. So I was lucky that I had Jeanette always fighting in my court, huge supporter of Fables. The reason that Fables was a monthly was Jeanette, and also Karen Berger, who, was my boss for over 20 years. So I saw those two people get laid off. So if you think for a minute, I didn't think that was coming for me, you're nuts. Because of course it was. But I talked to my family, after Karen left, I was offered the job, and I talked to my husband and my son, and I said, look, you guys, I know if I move to LA, I'll be walking the plank in a matter of years. But if I don't take the chance, I'll always regret it. And there were a lot of books in progress that I had invested in. There were 12 new monthly books that were in my heart and my head. And Neil Gaiman's final Sandman book, Overture, which was really the prequel to the Sandman, script was just written when Karen left. And so I always worked with Karen and Neil, but this one, this was like, well, I'm sure someone else could have edited it, but it would not have had the same care and attention that Karen and I gave that book for decades.
Yeah.
So my family was like, let's do it then. I mean, I have to give them all the credits for saying, let's give it a try. What's the worst thing that could happen? So the best thing I did for myself, knowing it was all going to crumble at some point, was I made my own demands to make it easy on myself and my family. So I actually asked for the opportunity to be moved a year before everybody else. And that way I could come out to LA and I could bid on a house that I could almost afford, but not quite, but afford enough in an area where I could send my son to a great school. He was 10, so fourth grade, not an easy time to change from coast to coast.
No.
And they paid for everything. So the moving van, I mean, when was I going to get another opportunity to try the West Coast? Not a beach person, not a fan of the sun. I'm super goth, as you can still see, even though the listeners can't. Pure as white on the top of my head and on my face. I like a pale complexion. So we just went for it. But knowing that it wasn't going to last, I was just going to get in there and make as many great comics as I could and then see what happens next, because I knew I would be a lifer making comics the day I read Stray Bullets #1.
Wow. Okay.
That wasn't meant to be a mic drop. I didn't mean, I do like the unexpected. I like when readers and interview hosts hear something that shocks them. And people already know that I like Oasis and I hate Blur. And that was a big shocker for about 22 years. And even my husband doesn't understand that one. And I don't care. But you
don't
seem
have to
shocked.
Explain yourself. You
What's
don't
that?
have to explain it. You don't have to
Okay,
explain
good.
yourself. I mean, we could argue otherwise, but we're not going to. But Stray Bullets that's a great on-ramp for modern comic books that also really sort of lived within a 50s aesthetic of of sort of like rural crime kind of feel.
Oh, Lapham is the master of modern crime noir. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Mic drop. Anyone who hasn't read Stray Bullets, it's like missing David Bowie 1970 to 1980.
Exactly. Look at that right there at arm's
Look
length.
at that. Hey, I don't know if you can see behind my head, and nobody will be able to see this but you, I think. My former boss, Chris Ryle,
Mm-hmm.
got
I
bought.
see.
Yeah, he commissioned David to do a recreation of Stray Bullets #1 as a goodbye gift when our Black Crown imprint for IDW had a fold, had to be shuttered. That was his thank you gift to me. I mean, that says everything you need to know about what happened to Shelly Bond after Vertigo.
Right.
Went on to make more comics for someone who really loved the work that I did at Vertigo and Kamiko. He knew my Kamiko work, which was awesome. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but LA has been a great place to raise a kid who's now in college studying music industry at CSUN, which is California State Northridge, great school. And when Philip and I are making comics through our own small boutique company, offregister.press, where we kickstart and crowdfund, and we basically do it all ourselves. And everything from, like you said, you got a signature, you got a postcard, our support staff at Off Register Press is a party of one, and that would be me. I do mail outs. I mean, Philip does too sometimes, but I enjoy it. I like connecting with the people who get the kind of books I think are worthy of putting my imprimatur on.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's it's so interesting because with you're starting off at Kamiko, which was such an exciting point of time in comics. Like when Kamiko was out there doing their thing, we had First was still alive. Like there were all these smaller companies putting books out that
Vortex too.
Right. And they were challenging what was happening with the big two at the time. I guess, I mean, hell, you load Dark Horse into that because they were just the new company as well. I mean, they were all these new businesses with an idea of like, how do we make the different comic books that we want to read that just don't get on the stands on a monthly basis.
It was an incredibly exciting time for black and white comics and for color comics. Late 80s, early 90s, way before 1993 with the Image boom and the birth of Vertigo. There were so many terrific comics sort of undulating, Yummy Fur. Love and Rockets was always the leader of the pack. And I think that's the reason why I wanted to make comics, because the Hernandez brothers were just so cool. And they made it cool for me to start to deconstruct what a comic book is and what kind of story it is. And even after all these years, I just look at their work and I feel like my eyeballs still shake, and I still try to process, like, how is that much talent, like, able to be on a page? How can a page contain that much talent with so few lines and limited palette, if any? To me, that's the kind of art that, like, gives me goosebumps still.
Yeah. It was an amazing explosion that, imploded, to some fanfare. I think some great things ended up outside of the sort of the immolation of those companies. But I guess the birth of Vertigo was one of the big opportunities that happened in that response, which I think was great. And I guess carrying the thread a little further is that now that the independent comic book is straight up just as accepted as any other kind of comic book in the industry, and the tools that we have available to us to produce and distribute these things that were impossible, 35 years ago, it's stunning. So you can have a boutique imprint and make these things, and in a remote little city like Los Angeles.
Well, I'm only chortling, because if you think we're making money and living the high life and living in Bel Air, you're nuts. We live in a mid-century bungalow on the border of Burbank and NoHo, North Hollywood. And again, I could barely afford it as a VP executive editor, woman who probably wasn't paid what her male counterparts were paid, naturally. So, woman who was hired in 92 as an assistant editor with editing credits on Elementals and then other titles. So the fact that sometimes when you're a woman, you have to, be a bit more vocal to try to get parity, which you never get because there were other women getting it. It goes without saying that no matter what, you probably aren't going to get rich in comics. The people that are rich are not likely going to be you or the people you know. So you have to be okay with that. So we don't live large. When you say LA, I think people tend to think that, like, you're like, surfing on weekends and going to every live show and eating sushi in top 5-star restaurants. The truth of the matter is we shop at the grocery outlet and we don't go out much, and all we do is make comics 24/7, and we sell things too. We sell some original art. Last summer, I sold 8 pieces of art that I cherished that were gifts to me from comic book artists. And I told them first because I didn't want them to know that the work wasn't appreciated. But I was out of a job. I couldn't get freelance, wasn't ready to kickstart, and we have a mortgage. So you learn to do things to supplement your income, and you just got to keep moving forward. So it's never been a business where people make money. The page rates that were paid to top Vertigo talents are still the same page rates many of them accept today. And that's sad. And that's why the industry is a mess. And I'm humiliated at what we're leaving our kids and leaving the next generation, which is another reason why I wrote Filth and Grammar. I knew I was going to get you back there to that thread, but I want to be straight up with you about that. I wrote Filth and Grammar because during the pandemic, everyone was complaining, nothing was being published. And uh, Philip and I basically learned how to physically print and design and assemble comics through Blackground, because Philip was the design genius and the tech person who actually made those books look gorgeous. And we had help from IDW, certainly, and all the people that worked there at the time were great. Chris Ryle, best boss I ever had. But Philip designed the look and did all the heavy lifting. And I eventually taught myself how to letter comics because we had to cut page rate so much. We couldn't afford to ditch a bit of car. We couldn't afford to pay him his page rate.
Mm-hmm.
And Addie thankfully went on to become a award-winning letterer and deserves to be because he's a rock star. But you learn to do things when things around you fall apart and it's not fair. But instead of boo-hooing about it, you just get on with it. You dust yourself off and you keep moving on. And that's why I made Filth and Grammar, because I knew if I pitched it to a publisher, they would hem and haw. They would wonder, does anyone really want this? They wouldn't think that I could necessarily write and design it because I'm not a writer or a designer. And then I would argue with them and say, well, the best comic book editors are art directors. And the reason why you don't know the names of a lot of comic book editors is because they have no visual acuity and they're scared to talk to and work with talent.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
not to come across as sounding like a bully, but a real comic book editor needs to be a Jill of all trades. And what you don't know, you have to fake or learn. And you learn by asking questions and being nice and doing favors for people and bartering and just being a nice human and not a douchebag.
Less douchebags is always preferred. Before the book came out, or before I was aware of the book, I have lots of friends. We talk about comics, and predominantly we'll talk indie comics. And I would say that the number one thing that I think that all these books benefit from is editing. There's just because I think that there's this lack of understanding of an objective eye onto a product to make sure that everything is as good as it can be
In a finite amount of time, right?
Right. Sure.
Because, and that's the trick. I think a lot of people are oblivious of the editor on a book. And to me, that's also very sad because the editor not only has to have an eagle eye and be quite knowledgeable about syntax and grammar and a decent or very good proofreader, but the percentage of error, the things that could go wrong on a comic book page is infinite. So can you imagine assembling, whether it's a 32-page periodical or, oh my God, a 160-page graphic novel, what could possibly go wrong? Absolutely anything and everything, and it will. So the best editors know what they look for at every stage and can pivot on demand like nobody's business, because you have to be able to make decisions on the fly. The number one excuse for not making comics is not getting it finished and not starting small. So you can see and feel the pride of what it means to say, I wrote my first comic, which is why my comics editing students all are tasked with making a one-page comic, and it's based on Hey Amateur. I have the one I made hanging on my wall, and I know your listeners can't see it, but you can now. But we do an anthology, a Hey Amateur anthology of one page, how to do anything in 9-panel comics. And most of my students are English majors. So when I tell them they're going to write and draw, they want to run and hide. And I say, if you can draw a circle and a square, you can make a comic.
Yeah.
And I can't draw, but I did. And then each semester I do a new comic, and I even make my students listen to me pitch them 3 ideas and edit my ideas. So my students edit me too. And that's the best way to learn. It's how I would train my assistant editors. That's the only way to understand how to put comics together, is to push someone off the high dive and help them if they're treading water for too long. Or sometimes maybe encourage them to work in a different department, because it's not a job for everyone, and it's not
Yeah.
a job for the faint-hearted. If you can't dish it out and take it, wrong job for you. You've got to hire and fire fast. You've got to hire the right people, but when they don't work out, you got to get out fast, or you're never going to make your ship date.
And that's, I mean, when you are on a schedule, that's the only thing that really, really matters. It's that date.
And that's what I think is missing from modern comics. The periodical, the monthly book, everybody loved because it was something to look forward to. And you wanted to have something that you could talk to your friends about, just like with indie bands, like, oh, they would have a release every year. Bowie and Roxy Music did this so well in the 70s. Every album was a 180 from its predecessor. You were always living for the moment when the first single would drop, or the interview in Cream magazine, Rolling Stone, or Select in the 90s. Couldn't wait for those moments. Comics is lacking editors who understand that to write a monthly book, you've got to deliver fast. And you cannot be worried about, is it the best I can do? How could it be if you're given a deadline of writing a script, one script per week?
Yeah.
If you can't write 5 pages a day, don't be a monthly comic book writer. But if you want to be a great comic book writer, cut your teeth on a monthly for a year. I mean, that's what Mike Carey did. That's what so many writers did. And that's, the best editors have a great eye and can see talent, whether it's in a cadence, in 2 captions, or whether it's in a layout for an artist who maybe doesn't draw figures that well, but can actually pace a page and move the eye from left to right, top to bottom, and across the spread to the page turn. That's great editing, is knowing who's right for the job, how we can get it done timely, and what we need to fix now or later when it's collected.
Right. The triage is important. What I love that you do the 1-page comic and you are doing them over and over again. Like, what for you, since it wasn't your role, but for what are you learning from doing it? Like, what has it brought to you? Well, I'm saying doing the 1-page comic yourself. What are you learning from doing that?
Well, the 1-page comic, I'm not sure if you knew of the book Hey Amateur that I put out. It was an anthology I kickstarted at the tail end of Black Crown. And I basically challenged friends and newcomers, operative word, new blood. And it's something I see happening. Again, another crime in comics right now is that so many people of my generation, and maybe 10 years younger than me or us, if I can be so presumptive, they're starting new comic book companies, and they have a group of people they've worked with that they respect, and they're doing exciting things, and I applaud that. But what about the art school graduates? What about the indie community in the UK and South Africa? Who's inviting those people in? And that's what I like to do. And I've always been about bringing in and mentoring the next wave of talent. So Hey Amateur was a way for me to call in some favors from some of my favorite people on the planet, Simon Bisley, Gail Simone, you name it. But also I keep my eye on indie scene, zine scene, and try to bring in people who would never get an opportunity to be in a hardcover with Philip Bond or Duncan Fegredo, or, somebody who I consider to be the top of their game. That's what I'm trying to do by making these books on how to make your comics look great, how to make them look better. And again, just to go back to your original question, and I apologize that I'm kind of going off on tangents, but people don't talk about the craft enough. And I'm only interested in comics as an art form right now. And that's why, to me, the best use of my time, however much of it is left, because I'm up there, been around for over 3 decades in comics. I just want to make sure that the kid in college or the kid in art school or the high schooler who doesn't want to know what they want to do with their life and they like comics but they can't write or draw, well, you can do what I did because it's cool.
Yeah.
And you just need to know what's involved. Well, that's what I want people to know. A lot of it is managing people, and a lot of it is communicating and delivering on your promise. It's as simple
Mm-hmm.
as that. And like you said, it's not, and the things we've talked about so far in this chat, they're all just like life skills. You know, it's stuff like if you're lucky, like I am, I have great parents who kind of, didn't baby me, didn't come from the helicopter generation, pretty much grew up in a working family business. So not a working class family. We were maybe, we did okay. We didn't want for anything, but we grew up in a family business. So my sister and I were not treated like Disney princesses. We were told to roll up our sleeves and help out at the dry cleaning plant. So
Mm-hmm.
we did. There was no arguing. I would rather be in a dance class, and sometimes on a Saturday I would go and help my dad. So when you're raised like that, I think you grow up with an appreciation for all different types of people and the challenges and hardships that everyone has to go through in life. And that's what we don't always see in comics and in the music industry, frankly. If you want to use a comparable analogy, you've got the rock stars and then you've got the wannabes. But all those people in between, they do good things too.
Yeah.
Just as long as you can stick with the people that aren't idiots and tools, you'll
I
do
think
okay.
we live in a time where we're so focused on image and sort of whatever level of fame whatever industry provides to people. And so when I feel that if you look at comic books from the outside, if you're new to it, well, you want to be that artist person, that writer person, the person who is getting all the attention on social media because they're the fountainhead of whatever this thing that you love is. But the editor is the sort of balance or equivalent of the record producer, the tastemaker engaged in the creative process that
Or the
without
showrunner. If I could just
or the
throw in a
showrunner.
showrunner there.
Totally, yeah. And without such, you don't have what the Beatles produce. You don't have what you see on the well, I guess they're not on the record shelves anymore, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. Well, the thing that's great about, what you were saying, how 35 years ago we could make zines always. How cool
Mm-hmm.
is that? But couldn't really make these beautiful hardcover collections or, these interesting, unique fold out. Thinking of like Ron Wimberly does Lab with Beehive books, and it's just this beautiful thing that you can unfold like a subway map. And you can't do these bespoke projects without a good cash flow, which you can have when you find your tribe, when you find your audience through
Yeah.
crowdfunding or other means. But you started talking about filth and grammar and asking me questions about it, and there's nothing I love more than lifting up the curtain to show everybody what happens behind the scenes. And this year in my comics editing class at Portland State, the comic that I wrote as the one pager was how to break into comics, because that's all students want to know. Whenever I go to conventions, that's all people ask me. And the comic is about how there's no secret formula. Just roll up your sleeves. It's not easy. And if you are going to wince every time you pull out a red pen and get some ink on your hands, this is not the job for you.
Yeah.
So I think I misunderstood your question when you said, what do I learn from making one-page comics? Well, what don't you learn? To me, what my students don't understand is that a one-page comic story can be 9 panels or it can be 2 panels.
Mhm.
It depends. And the greatest thing about comics is you have to decide what you want to say and write with intent, what you want to show, and what you want to leave out for the reader to deduce, and what happens between the panel borders. Or, Eisner called it, I think, blood in the panels,
Mhm.
between the panels. But you have so many options, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to forget that at each stage you're looking for brevity and clarity, but you also don't want to take out the things that make your work wholly and uniquely your own. And so that's what I hope that my comics editing students get from our class, because we have a 10-week semester, and every week we go through process from idea, light bulb in your head, and how it translates to a piece of paper. And we go through Filth and Grammar. We use that as a teaching tool. So we go through the chapters, and every week there's a different part of that 1-page comic that's due. And we go through the writing and the editing of the words, the roughs, the balloon placement, the lettering. Everybody has to letter. The greatest moment in that class is when I ask the students to pick their wordiest panel of the 9 panels and hand letter it. And they get a couple of days to do it. And it's always overwritten, and they can't believe how long it takes to make it look legible and readable at size. Because the greatest lesson to be learned right now in comics is when people go from webtoons or Instagram swipes to print. Well, not only is that going to be a point size challenge, and you better test it out before you hit the print button, but you have to look at the pacing, which is different on the screen than it is on the page.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think there's been such a huge gap between webtoons and Tapas, whatever digital comics have been out there, and the printed comic book that actually is readable versus, oh, I saw it at a comic book store and I didn't open it up before I bought it. And when I got it home, I couldn't read it
Yeah.
because the point size is tiny or blurry.
Yep.
And the fact that these companies had comics people at their helms who didn't help them with this says a lot about the quality of editors comics has had over the years. Not impressive. And some of them were acquaintances.
Yeah. I mean, when I got the book, I put aside other things and I sat down and read the book straight through.
Oh,
And
thanks. That's a compliment, and I'm going to take it.
And I flagged tons of pages in it because there's so much information in here. I have very close friends who are making comic books on their own. And I go through, I'm like, hey, listen, think about this. Like, I just read this. This is super, like this makes all the sense in the world. And the way you frame it, it's understandable versus me, trying to figure out how to say it in a clear way. And it's,
I had a lot of help, by the way. I never like to take full credit for that book. I had 2 editors, by the way, and a slew of talented friends and colleagues. And if you notice, the young woman who did most of the sequential art for me, Imogen Mangle, right out of art school.
Nice.
22 years old when I hired her. And the truth of the matter is that I did not expect her to be that amazing at first pencil line. I had hoped she would let me print some of her mistakes, because that's how you learn, and that's how you teach other people how to make comics and how to make decisions about what might make a better panel, varying figure sizes, great close-up every 2 pages. But Jen was so good, I didn't have the heart to do that. So I actually had to think, how am I going to make this book interesting? And how am I not going to do something that actually would, to me, it wasn't fair, because she was so good. So instead, I kind of wanted to celebrate her talents. And believe me when I tell you, like, her evolution as an artist is amazing, but she was talented before she met me. So like, I never like to come along and say, I, you know, I made her such a great artist. I think we just worked well together and I learned a lot from her too. And
Yeah.
that's comics is a collaboration. It's never just about like, you know, taking all the credit, and editors don't often get a lot of credit, but it's being part of a team and also knowing when to let a page go and get it out of your hands so it can actually go to press and ship on time. So the people who are expecting it get it when it was delivered. Also a
Yeah.
problem on Kickstarter, right? Also a problem with a lot of crowdfunders. I still get project updates from people whose work
Oh,
I bought 2 years ago.
yeah.
And that's,
Same.
yeah. And that's a Kickstarter problem in some ways. Kickstarter hasn't wanted to address that, and that's, hey, it's their business and that's their business model. But I think anyone who decides to crowdfund, and I teach, sometimes teach classes through our website, and I teach about crowdfunding, and I say, look, you know, Kickstarter, when you sign up to do a Kickstarter, you check off the box and basically sign a clause that says they're not liable for anything. They'll get their 10% and then it's on you. And that's how they set up their business model. So it's not their fault. But if they want to build a stronger community, they certainly should have comics leads and directors that maybe want to help better the process,
Yeah.
because it's sometimes worse than ever when people who don't understand the job or what they're asking of people and how much time it takes to actually package 1,700 hardcovers. You know, you really need to know
Right.
what you're promising before you collect all that money, because you can't live off of it.
No, and I think that's because Kickstarter, there is no barrier to entry. So you can have the most comics famous person in the world making a comic, and you can have someone who's never made anything in the comic industry before both do a book at the same time. And even the most experienced comic book maker probably hasn't done every bit of the work in the comic industry. So they may hit, but they'll hit some barriers, but theoretically they have more access to friends who have that information and experience, who can say, hey, here's how you get through this. And then the other people, on the other hand, have none. So they really are in the dark trying to figure it out all the way through. And unfortunately, like you said, Kickstarter they don't care. There's no sort of like, okay, upload your finished comic book before you start your campaign so we can prove that you can do this.
Yep. And they, you know, as a business model, that's their prerogative, but no one tells, you know, the kid in the middle of the country who maybe can draw well, but has no idea that the postage in 6 months is going to be doubled what they thought that they're going to have to charge.
Right.
And also, you know, you had said it before, but it's like, if you don't hire an editor or at least a qualified proofreader to look at your work, it's so hard to not only be objective, but it's also hard to miss the typos because you know the story, especially if you're doing the whole thing yourself, right? If you're just self-publishing, if you're the writer, and that even happens to me, like I challenged myself to be a writer, only because I couldn't afford to pay a writer and an artist. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose to write Filth and Grammar myself, because I had to pay a lot of money because I wanted to pay my artists fairly. And I also wanted to pay an editor. And I ended up paying two because I had someone who was great with the front end of the project, getting everything that was in my head somehow organized structurally onto the page. And I went to a friend who taught high school English, and she gave me some great tips for that. But then I wanted someone who was familiar with comics, who edited books and comics, to help me on the other side. So you got to budget yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had all the information I wanted to impart from experience, I figured I better try it myself first. And if I really can't do it and finish this thing in 3 months, maybe I shouldn't be making it anyway. So I gave myself really strict challenges, and that's why it came out when it did, because I hit my deadline eventually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, if I was, if I was young and I was making comic books, or if somebody young is making comic books and wants to know what they need to know about how to make comic books, along with the other notable books out there, this to me is one of the books that everyone should read,
Well, thank you.
because you're going to understand it takes more than just scribbling down a story on a legal pad and then drawing something. Like there's a lot more involved to make it a real solid thing.
It is true. And also, I think a lot of writers from other disciplines have no idea that when you write comics, you don't just write the word balloons and the captions. You have to write the art direction. And that is a very delicate balance, because a page of comics shouldn't really be more than one page type script. It doesn't have to be double spaced, but maybe 1.5. So you can actually read it without squinting. You don't want the point size to be too small. I think a lot of people in TV and film and other fields, video games, podcasts, they think that writing comics is just the writing part, and it's just a small part of it. Because a really good writer will know how to make a story personal, not just for the reader, but the first reader is the editor and the second reader is the artist. So you want to make it something that's not overwritten, so that the artist actually feels like they're having a contribution. So they're not just being told what to draw, but they're being told what the writer would like to see, but there also is some room for them to flex their skills. And that's where great editing comes in. It's knowing when the writers are overwriting for the talent or when they're underwriting. And so, for me, I still feel like I'm the luckiest person on the planet. I worked with two of my favorite writers who've taught me, I think, everything I could possibly want to know about a perfect script, between Bill Willingham, who I discovered when I was working at Kamiko, chasing him around the country to get the last Elemental script out of him. Could you imagine being chased on the phone by a 22-year-old goth girl with hair as big as Robert Smith's, who looked 11? Like, why would he listen to me? Talented guy, terrific writer, great artist. He didn't need to listen to me, but somehow I got the work out of him and thought he was talented enough that when I finally got to Vertigo, I knew I was going to look him up, because he was the first person to make me almost respect superheroes. Never liked superheroes, came to comics loving Grendel and sort of the more arty, existential, indie spirited books. But Elementals made me sort of wake up and say, hey, if the writer is talented, maybe this type of superhero can change my expectations of what superhero comics are. Have not strayed from that too often. Only have ever really read a handful of superhero books. And I do not mean to dismiss anyone else's love for superheroes. A lot of people hate Oasis. I love the band. They write cracking tunes. They had 2 perfect albums. Live at Nebworth, a favorite live show. To each his own. That's what makes us all unique. But, the idea that I got to work with Peter Milligan, who I think writes the perfect comic book script. It's lean, it's mean, and he knows that it's liquid. And I use the word liquid because when I interviewed him for my editing classes, I asked him in one word to share with my students what they need to know about writing scripts. And he said, you have to remember that a script, even when it's approved, it's liquid, because comics are a collaboration. And if you're not ready to pass your part of the job along, maybe you should think about just writing a book or sculpting. Do something that you can do as one person where you can control everything, because that's not comics unless you're doing it yourself. And if you're doing it yourself and you self-publish and you write and draw, I beg you to at least hire an editor or a good proofreader. You'll thank me later. And you can thank me in chocolate. You can thank me with British chocolate. I like the Whisper Bar. That's my new favorite.
We shouldn't get paid in chocolate. We should actually get paid.
British chocolate's expensive if you don't live in England. So, I could
what
argue
was
that point with you. I feel like
What was that?
I could argue at any time points with anybody. I feel like we're living in a world where everybody has an excuse and everybody has a valid point of view if it means something to them. And that's another reason why I think a lot of people that start out to make comics give up. They get frustrated because they kind of don't know what to do. And the number one true editing crime is not finishing your first comic. So set your goal small. I say
Yeah,
do a one pager. That's why I use the one pager in my class.
I think that's great advice. I think when I set out to write my first novel, I failed, like so many novelists do. And I have a very, very smart friend who has always been there for me and said, listen, write a short story. And my response, of course, was, well, I don't want to write short stories. I want to write novels. And he goes, I get it, but just write a short story. What he knew is that I just needed to see that I could see this through, get to the end of it. And that way, you know how to do the steps that you need to do. There's just a lot more steps involved if you're doing a 32-page comic book or a 500-page novel. I mean, they're just, but it's just more of the same stuff. And I think that one page is brilliant.
It's just, you learn so much also when you challenge yourself to do everything from the pitch. In my class, we do live pitching to each other. That's important. You need to be able to winnow your idea down to its essence.
It's the most important thing. It's everything, because as a writer, your job is to be able to see an entire story at once. That's the job of the writer. It's not to sit there and bang away at a keyboard to find the story. I'm not saying you need to know this when you start, but the key is that if you can't see the entire story, how are you going to tell anyone about it?
Well, and that's also knowing your ending. And I used to get a lot of pitches certainly when I was at Vertigo in the 90s and the 2000s. And I would always, ask people about their setup and their ending. And so many people are like, oh, I can't commit to an ending until I actually get into character. It's like, I can't commit to buying a pitch then. And I'm the first person to say, I like when stories evolve organically. And I love when you throw more challenges at your characters. My favorite two words are to throw to a writer is what's worse, because we've seen it all done to death in 2024. Maybe in 97, I couldn't say that, but in 2024, we've all watched the shows, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, Succession, you could Breaking Bad. We can look at these shows and we could say, we know what it's like to watch vile people become better and worse. So what's going to make it more interesting? And if people don't have an ending in sight, they don't know their story. And if it changes and it's better, I'll be the first one to say, bravo. But the editor's job is to also remind the writer sometimes and tapping them on the back with the red pen, saying, you kind of already said that in chapter 2. You have this character who has a very similar cadence to this other character. So let's talk about the character. Sometimes people's characters sound the same, and it's because the editor doesn't say, hey, why does that 19-year-old sound like that 81-year-old school marm? You're going to use contractions once in a while? Because, have you ever walk into a classroom with 19-year-olds, they don't talk in full sentences and they don't talk formally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cadence and voice that sometimes people forget about.
Yeah, you remark, I think, repeatedly in your book about simplify, 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 because there's a lot of, like, if you kill every chance of repetition, like that whole repetition thing, it's just a writer's crutch. What writers are trying to do is find that way towards simplification, so they keep writing the same thing
Yes.
within the story.
Well, it happens with theme too. I feel like, now let me just qualify what you said. Um, Repetition that's intentional or a leitmotif, I love.
Sure.
There's nothing more beautiful than nuance and planting seeds, especially visually in comics. It's why we make comics. You know, the way we can play with time between panel borders, that's magic. That's real magic. But when I speak about repetition in the book, and I appreciate that you said I repeat myself, and I try my best not to repeat myself in a bad way, but that's just you needing an editor, and that's everybody needing an editor, and that's just you need someone who could actually, tell you to go wash your face and then read it again. And I recommend going to a different room or going to the library on your last draft before you send it to your editor. Or if you're proofreading, use note cards. If you use a red pen, try using a different color pen then next time. Anything you do to trick your brain into thinking you're looking at something for the first time is going to help you in the long run.
Yeah, that's super true. So you mentioned earlier about bringing new people into the industry, or at least offering the opportunities for that. And I think that's something that I definitely noticed was missing. And that's almost how I got in the business, was through anthologies. Like that was the gateway to bringing in new talent, to trying people to try out, go, hey, can you do 8 pages? Can you write this? Can you draw this? Can you color this? And that's all but vanished in a business, especially on the main side. And it's not, I would say, viable for a small publisher to bring on an anthology with people that they have untested, because it's very hard for them to make a sale off of an unknown property with unknown creators.
Well, that's why I really enjoyed working on anthologies like Femme Magnifique and Hey Amateur, and Heavy Rotation was another one I did over the pandemic when my um, old DJ friends from 80s college radio got together on a Zoom chat just for fun. And I was looking at all these people who had writing capabilities, and 2 of the 15 liked comics, but none of them really read comics. Oh, I think one of them did. One of them actually did follow like some of the books I worked on. But like, it just occurred to me, like, I could get these people to write short stories or editorials or essays and pair them up with people like Phil Sienkiewicz or Brett Parson, or, it was a chance for me to write my own short story and cut my teeth. So when you speak to people in the industry who care about both the art form and the business, you'd be surprised at how many of them know people who want to break into comics who they might have met at a convention, or who might be their cousin's brother's stepkid who likes to draw and is in art school and doesn't know what to do with his life. I think you'll find that when you meet the superstars, the ones that are nice, also have an innate desire to pay it forward. And, just recently someone said to me, I heard you mentored somebody for 3 months after your editing class. That's a really nice thing to do. And you paid that person. Why do you do that? And I said, well, I don't do it because I have extra money, but I do it because I thought that the student was exceptional and the student wanted to learn the business side of running an imprint. And I'm hoping that one day a producer or someone who's in audio production who likes to mix will offer the same kindness to my son. I mean, our son, sadly, thinks comics are okay, thinks his parents are weird, and wants to be, he's a musician, he plays drums, he wants to mix. So I'm hoping that the good karma comes back to me. And the young person that I mentored, their parents are physical therapists. So they were grateful that I extended my hand for a few months to their child. And so I'm hoping someone's going to give back to my son in the same way.
Yeah,
that's living a good life.
Yeah, I can recall many people taking their time out for me when I was young due to some familial connection and just asking a question. What can, would you talk to him? Could you please talk him out of this?
Yes. And, honestly, it's those moments. I love the phrase stolen moments. You always think that those moments are about romance, but I like to think of them as like things you can keep in your pocket. They're the times in your life where you can look back and you can count them on one hand, but somebody did you a solid, whether they looked you in the eye and said, you're too short to be a Broadway rockette, which, by the way, I kind of knew. My dad, I was 13, and I was 5'2". You had to be 5'10". Pretty obvious I was going to make it on the stage, right? But you do need someone to be straight up with you. And most people are not going to be artistic rock stars. You're not going to be Simon Bisley. You're not going to be Frank Quitely. And you probably aren't going to be Grant Morrison. But you can write well. Maybe you'll be a superstar letterer. Sometimes you just need to speak to someone who's a realist, who can actually look at your strengths and say, hey, you are good at this. Or if you want to be great at this, go take some light drawing classes. Draw every day. You find so many people who say they want to write taking writing classes or buying books and reading about writing. The only way to be a comic book writer is to write every day and talk to someone who can help you figure out what's unique and and what's unique and interesting about your writing and what isn't. I mean, that's really important.
And writing, I always feel like I have to stand up and defend comic book writing so many times because I know plenty of novelists or screenwriters who are like, well, I'm gonna write a comic book, and I go, that's great, but it's not writing a screenplay and it's not writing a novel. They're all very different disciplines.
And that's another reason why I wrote Filth and Grammar. And to be really honest with you, and I know you probably have to go in a few minutes, I think you can see I love talking about the craft, and I feel so lucky, like, that I had this incredible experience of being a comic book editor for big companies, small companies, freelance, working with my husband. So trust me when I tell you, I feel lucky, and it's luck and hard work. That's what it is. And it's being kind and thoughtful. But I feel like one of the reasons I made sure I put the script format in Filth and Grammar was because being out in LA, I would run into people who'd be like, oh man, I always wanted to write a comic because I have a film. It's just storyboards, right? I'm like, no, it's not. In fact, it's the antithesis. So no. And it got to the point where I had people who wanted to hire me and pay me, less than what I could get paid working as a cashier at Target, which honestly, I would happily do. I've had every kind of odd job you can imagine, from working at an ice cream parlor to working at a movie theater to working at my dad's dry cleaning plant, which I've talked about, and that was gross, by the way. I had to sort hotel laundry, and I had to use a pants presser. And that is not an easy thing. People have no respect for comics when they don't understand what it takes to put one together. So I not only wrote the book, but I also must tell you that I took a TV writing class so that I could understand why the TV and film writers think writing comics is so easy, and they think it's a quote unquote vehicle for their quote unquote IP story to get them a TV show or a film. So I took a class, and the reason I'm mentioning it to you is because I'm paying it back to my wonderful TV writing teacher, Pilar Alessandra, because without Pilar's class, which she taught on weekends for a month, it met on a Saturday for 2 hours of theory and 1 hour on Sunday for Q&A. Without Pilar's immense knowledge and supreme teaching skills, I would have not been able to teach my own classes from Filth and Grammar over the past few years, because I modeled my classes after hers, and I spoke to her at length about how I wanted to do that and why I took her class. And so I took it because it was the pandemic. I was tired of meeting these people who wanted to hire me for $20, not even respect what I was going to do with their work if I chose to do so. And honestly, I feel like I have a better understanding of why people dismiss comics as a legit industry. They just don't know how we do it, and they just assume it's really easy.
Mm-hmm.
So fair enough. I try to provide at least some reading material and resources to show them they've got to be crazy if they think it's easy. And I think the people that get it love it. The people that don't get it say thanks and walk away, and realize that they insult us by thinking it's a similar discipline, because it's so not.
Yeah. No, it's and it's evident in the writing when you read whatever they hand over as a comic book script, or when you read a screenwriter's novel, you go, boy, you're just writing this like a television show, or it doesn't read like a book. I'm not in the character. You're just telling me what the actions are. And it's an interesting because they're expecting the directors and the actors to do all that sort of that nuanced heavy lifting that happens on the screen, which they're great at. But in the terms of comic books, with a very small group of people making this thing that fills your head with so much wonder, that, as you said earlier, it's the job of that writer to communicate to the editor, to the artists, and then ultimately to the reader. And you have to do it in a way that is going to be more inclusive and more expressive each iteration.
Yes. Which is why comics to me are the ultimate art form, because you have a choice when you open up a comic book page. You can continue on, you can stop, go back to it later, you can finish it in one sitting like you did with Filth and Grammar, and I absolutely I'm flattered, and I appreciate you saying that to me, and I hope that you'll read it again and again. You have those dog-eared flagged pages. The handbook was meant to be beaten up. If you want to eat one of the pages, that's okay. If you want to highlight those pages, I put it on a sturdy manga stock. It'll take your highlighter. But comics is best because you control the pace. You control what you see. So you can go back again and again, and you will always find something new. And it was there all along. But maybe it was hidden. Maybe you weren't supposed to see it until you were a little bit older. Like going back and watching a movie. You'll always remember something that you loved as when you were coming of age. And if you see it now, it might be a disappointment, but hopefully not. Hopefully it won't be, because I still believe people don't really change.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you can better yourself, and you can become more mindful, and you can become not as much of a jerk as maybe you were once upon a time. But I do think that when you look at a body of work and it's told in a comic, every choice that you see on that page, that you hear or you see, and you hear through sound effects or you hear through the cadence of the writer, was intentional and was not arbitrary. And that's the other thing I think a lot of people coming to comics from other fields think, oh, I'll just throw this in, I'll take this out. When it's a TV show, we'll do this. It's like, best comic book story is the one that's written for the page, so that you can work towards the page turn. You can actually feel the payoffs. They don't have to be the same cliffhanger every month. And that's the editor's job to remind you, hey, you did that same splash page on page 22 last month. Let's end on a different note. Let's go to a different character. Let's subvert the expectation. That's the editor talking to the writer, and the writer saying, oh, thanks for reminding me. I don't want to tell the same story from issue to issue or from year to year. When we can all acknowledge that that's been done and done to death, that's where we can really start innovating again in comics.
Yeah. And, I look forward to more innovation in the industry, just on every level that we can get it.
Me too.
I think technology has opened a lot of doors for a lot of new stuff. And I hope that we not only reap the benefits of whatever the technological aspects are, but we can also bring them on a story level, on a socio-political level. I mean, there's infinite things that we can bring into this industry to continue to make stories.
And I think that it's key for us all to remember that diversity and inclusion at the top are critical. We see so many new companies. Every month I see a new company coming up, and it's run at the top. And by the top, I mean the publisher, the editor-in-chief, the chief creative officer, the executive editors, and the line editors are often from the same age and gender, and that is just ridiculous. Yeah. We did better. Comics did better in the late 90s and up to the mid to late 2000s. And then things started to fall apart. So let's all just be better about that. And let's, as a generation, mine and yours and the generation behind us that's following in our footsteps, let's do better. Let's look out for the next wave of talent from all over the world. And let's try to give people a break and a chance. That's how we're going to actually really innovate comics for the future.
I love that. I love that.
Thanks. I feel like you were leading me there. So I will leave it with you. Thank you so much for supporting my work, for really just the kind words. I will share it with my collaborators. There were many on Filth and Grammar and on Fast Times, the follow-up, which is part 2 of the graphic novel memoir editing trilogy. Third one, I promise you, it's been in the works. I had to push it off until early 2025 for reasons. I've got some other pretty big things going on in the background, including Geezer 3, which is kickstarting as we speak. It just launched, and at last check, it was already clocking in at like $1,500, which is excellent. So thanks to all the Geezer music fans out there listening. We see you. We hear you. But the next time we speak, I had to bite my tongue, but I gotta know why you're Blur and not Oasis. It sounds to me like you were not too happy when you heard about my, I wouldn't say devotion to the Gallagher brothers, but my appreciation for their first 2 albums and their Live at Nebworth show.
Well, I'm Camp Knoll if I'm in the Gallagher family.
Right.
That's my side, but I really appreciate the exploratory nature of Damon Albarn's musical stylings.
I can't get over Country House. I can't not see him dressed like Oliver. Please, sir, may I have another? I'm sorry. I was never going there.
I love Graham Coxon's guitar. He's such a great guitar player in a non-traditional sense.
That I'll give.
Yeah.
I also quite liked Alex James's memoir, A Bit of a Blur.
I haven't read it, and I've heard only really, really good stuff about it.
It's excellent. I sent him an email, got his email address from a friend of a friend who's a friend. And my email subject header said, comic book editor seeks bass guitarist to talk about writing comics.
Hmm.
And he wrote back to me, and he just like started a cheese farm, and he was in the middle of, making a family, and was flattered that I asked and was interested, but I never heard from him again,
Hmm.
which I get. But Will Potter, by the way, the bassist of Cud, is a comics writer, was part of Deadline magazine and worked with my husband, Philip Bond, back in the day, and writes a superb comic about the greatest Britpop bands that almost made it, but didn't quite make it in the 90s. So that's the one that we're talking about, Geezer. I'll wrap up there with my shameless self-promotion, and thank you again for taking so much time and chatting with me about comics process and craft and the art form, which again, the industry can remain in a dumpster fire and will remain in a dumpster fire unless we all step up. But the art form is endless and a beautiful thing. So I'm all
Yeah.
about it. And thank you again.